with all that's going on, I didn't start the record button. Will you please start recording?
I did start. I did start,
Uh,
Marie.
Thank you, Jock, for having my back. Okay. People, the College of Graduate Studies launched a support program for you yesterday. If you haven't received the email, I'll put this on the chat line that we have with the meeting, because they really have exceptional plans for you coming up. One of the plans that they have is to start a kind of discussion group for postgraduate studies, and they're very ambitious. They are trying to involve as much of Africa as possible. And you can imagine what that will do to your CV if you can become part of such a group. The other thing is that we've spoken a lot about the context of research, and Africa has its own challenges and problems. And the sooner we start doing our research on our problems, the sooner we can start solving those problems. So I'll definitely put this on the chat line so that you can join up and start benefiting from the College of Graduate Studies. The next one is, I'm going to speak about how do you analyze qualitative data. If you have quantitative data, you can do quite a lot with Excel. I was in a support team at another university where I saw how they worked with Excel, and you can really do a lot with Excel. But because qualitative data is actually so very complex, it is necessary to use other analysis software. And here I'm quickly just going to share the screen with you. Is a lecture that they had at head office. Okay, I don't want to leave my meeting team now to go, but if you click on this, if you, am I still on your line, Jock?
You are me?
Okay. If you click on this, I'll post this also to the chat line. If you click on this, you'll be able to see the full recording plus all the slides of this workshop. So I am not going to do with you the digital analysis today. And the advantage of watching this workshop is that you can actually stop and start as you go along. So that it will especially help if you have two screens. So you can work on one screen and actually learn from the other screen. Then here is what we plan for the next, for this term or the semester. You can see I still sometimes think in school terminology. Today we are doing the thematic analysis and coding. Next week we're looking at the plagiarism and the citations. And then on the 5th of September, we are going to do how to edit a paper, because some of you are getting close to handing in finals, or you have to start your preparation for the research proposals that need to be in usually towards the end of January. And then on the 5th of September, I've completed the kind of curriculum for these workshops. But if you are in a group or even on your own, and you want me to go through a specific aspect again, you can contact me and we can make an appointment and we can have then a discussion on an issue that you are especially interested in. And those discussions will then be on Teams, because it's easy. You and I can record it and you can go back, and then it's much easier if one can go back in a meeting. The discussion forums are currently for us locally, but if we can help, I was thinking about the advantage of the smaller discussion groups. Can you imagine if you can write on a CV, I did my honors or masters in, many of you are doing things for the public service, and then say, and I have presented my research to the support group or on a discussion forum. You immediately give a lot of substance to your CV. So the idea of this discussion forum is to try and strengthen your research CV as well as your professional CV. If you are going to present and you haven't worked with teams before, I promise to help and guide you through the process. And as you can see, even if I get upset because I can't do anything, Sivu keeps calm and he keeps us on the right track. So between Jacques, Sivu, and myself, we will definitely help you to have a good presentation. And there's nothing like getting to understand your work if you have to explain it to other people. For those of you who are doing an honors or a master's with the idea to go into teaching, it is good exposure to peer review. If you want to present, you can contact me at italiam@unisa.ac.za, and then we can take it from there. Before we go, I quickly need to go back to Teams. Sorry. Wait. I need to see if you don't. Oh, here I see there is the conversation you have filled in. If you have. Oh, somebody's in the wrong session, but it doesn't matter. You can really fill in here, and you can also ask any questions that you want to ask at this stage. What I find usually, I am quite strict about silence, because you can imagine on my side things are happening and on your side and everything. But if you want to take part, just click on the raise your hand and I'll give you permission to unmute yourself and take part in the conversation. Remember, right, for those of you who have been with me right at the beginning, we spoke about it, that the scientific process is a matter of going up and down and revisiting places where we've been. This is part of our literature review, where we look at existing theories and observations. Then we move to hypothesis. From the hypothesis, we make predictions, and then we start our own observations. From there, we might have to go back to our literature review, because we realize I don't understand what I'm seeing. Maybe I should read something else. I'm not going to go through everything again, but what you must realize at this stage of your research, if here you realize I need to go back to my literature review because this and that I don't understand. I thought it would work like A, now it works like F. You are not really going back. You have gained so much insight that you can actually improve on your previous perceptions. And that is a very important part of research. Now, the next one for this, I need to thank my colleague Lynn Isaacs. What I want you to do, and I'll be glad if you can do that in the chat line, is to see if you at this stage can summarize your research in the line of a story. Once upon a time, researchers, whoever they are in your area of interest, I like to use Maslow here because it's a reference that's applicable more or less to everything, believed that that's your literature review. But what I think is, this is the gap that you need to research. What I will do is, and I could find out which would change the way I'm going to give you 3 minutes to see if you can summarize your research in this center, like this. And if you can please do that in the chat. Am I not updating or aren't you typing in the chat? Which chat are you typing? Mr. Malali or Mrs. Malali, I'll put on the screen again. This is a good way to actually plan and also summarize your research for yourself. Oh, this is an interesting one. Once upon a time, scientists thought that gravity is purely a result of bending of space-time. I don't know enough, Christian, to know whether what you are saying is perfectly true or not. But can you see that he immediately grants his research in a theory that worked in his field at a time? There's sometimes a problem with a meeting chat that it takes a bit of time to update. Jacques, will you please because then the rest of the people, oh, look at this one. Once upon a time, environmentalists thought that the earth was not warming, refuted global warming. Immediately, what I like about those, because it's totally out of my field of expertise, but even if an outsider reads this, immediately you know what it's going to be about. So I want you to try, for your own benefit, see if you can do this exercise and keep it in a kind of journal. And as you go through your research, every time you change it, you are actually moving through this process and you are refining it. It will really be interesting for me to read through all of them afterwards. So I'll be very glad if you write it in there, or otherwise just send it to me as an email, because it looks as if it will make up for fascinating reading. Then, where are we now? Look at the research statement, because this is more or less where most of you are going now. I want to research X because I want to find out why, in order to understand Z, so that. What was interesting, and you should actually try and watch the recording of Lynn Isaacs when she shared her research with us, because what they have is a notice board. So you have this research statement, and then you update it from time to time. Those of you who are working on your research proposal will definitely get feedback that something is too vague or that your topic is too wide. You can imagine that guy doing the global warming. I mean, that is really a wide, very wide topic. So not even in a PhD can you cover everything of global warming. And what Lynn showed us was the evolution of her research statement. And this is the statement that you need to work on before you start your research proposal, and then you will keep on refining it. And these two short templates I've given you, that will be part of this recording, and I'll put it into the chat file as well. It's very important that you keep this and that you update it every time that you have done something. Like if you have read an article and the article hasn't changed anything in these two templates, you either have to read another article or you have to read the article again. I'm speaking about this because when we get to coding, we have such a lot of information. Look at this. When you do qualitative research, let's compare it to somebody looking at the nature of eating disorders amongst teenage girls. That's bulimia and nervosa and anorexia. It's diseases like that. If you are looking at the characteristics and the whole being, you are looking at it from a qualitative approach. You have focus groups. They often have focus groups because anorexia is one of those funny, contagious diseases. One girl gets too thin, and all of a sudden you have 4 or 5 of them in the same school. So you can have a focus group. Schools, especially girls' schools, often have a policy and a procedure if they suspect a girl of having an eating problem. So those are official documents. You may have an interview with a girl recovering from bulimia, and in the meantime, you are taking field notes because you come into the school. You notice what's happening in the school, and do you see what a lot of data you have and how complicated the data actually is. If you have been studying the physical biology of a girl suffering from anorexia, you would have weighed her and you would have taken her measurements, you would have taken her temperature, and those things you all put into an Excel sheet, or Lizzie would have told you about some kind of other sophisticated thing. But the person doing the research and the person taking the measurements can be two different people. The person doing the research on the physical side of something like anorexia may be a doctor in Johannesburg or a dietitian in Johannesburg, but they are measuring the girls in the expensive private schools in Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. Do you see how the difference? Therefore, the data analysis, when you are doing qualitative research, because your data is so complicated and within a context, You need special rules. And these rules, I'm now speaking to the honors people preparing for their mini dissertation next year. I'm speaking to the master students handing in their research proposals, and for the rest of you, that's for you as well. But can you see that your data analysis makes up a big part of how you plan your methodology? Because data, qualitative data collection needs to go through what they call a rigorous process. When you have this, now you have all this information. Do you see? This is an example. I found an example. I read the article and then at the end I realized that this is more or less what I can use. Do you see that this was research done on the career expectations of young Muslim girls in a London school? They had interviews with the girls, with the parents, and with a group of teachers. Then from that, they took a focus group and they had interviews with them again. Can you see that these are the main themes that they identified? And these main themes that they identified came from their research questions. And we're going to come back to that again. And then from that, they identified sub-themes. Now, this was at this stage, but we are going to speak about it later. So what is then the link between young Muslim girls' view of marriage? Remember, the customs originated in another culture. They not only moved countries, or their parents didn't only move countries, they moved to a different way of thinking. So what is the relationship between identity and your idea of marriage, your idea of family life? And then can you see that this, if you think back to what you had, that to come to this insight, we need immersion in data. One article that I read even called it drowning in data. So when you have your analysis of data in qualitative research, you look for categories, relationships, and assumptions, because that will be in your findings, your recommendations for the next level of research. And you see that here we can actually have a picture of this researcher's view of the relationships and of the categories. We can't see the assumptions will be written later. And then the codes that you are going to use. And that's why they speak about an immersion in the data. And words like immersion, you must actually explain in your methodology. How are you going to dive into the data? Because if we go back to this part, Do you see that you can't only listen to the interview that you have recorded once? Because one time you are going to listen and then pay special attention to what is the teacher's idea, how does the teacher experience views on marriage. And the next time you are going to listen carefully to listen, how does this teacher play the role as a mentor for Muslim girls in this school? So you need to go through the data again and again and again. So the codes that you identify will depend on words, phrases, sentences, and sometimes even whole paragraphs. Those of you who attended Jacques' discussion of his masters, do you remember he said that he kept all the information for 5 years, and that is part of providing an audit trail. This skill, remember I told you that when one does research, and the people doing quantitative research, I saw quite a few, chemistry, the global warming, I just quickly looked at it. This isn't a skill that is only related to qualitative research. It is a skill related to research, because you also have to, when you work, you also have to look, and you also have to create categories, relationships, and say, what were your assumptions? Now, where do I find my codes? I've spoken about it earlier, but the first one is, remember the conceptual framework? Here is an example. If we look at one of the codes was marriage, and then the different views of marriage we have as part of it. So every time that I read through as I read through the several interviews and listen to the recordings of the transcriptions of the recordings of the focus group, I notice and remember concepts are abstract words. So you need to listen to the abstract words. So we find our codes in our conceptual framework, in our research questions. Because and that's one of those things that I do when I read your paper critically, and it's part of the editing process. If you have a concept in your research question, it must be in your objective. And then when you code, when you're getting ready to write your research report, that word must be there again. In your hypothesis, in your problem areas. So remember, I told you one of the things that would make your research would ground it, and that I saw in those chat lines, that when you identify, if you are going to speak about global warming, in your coding, there must be something about global warming again. And unfortunately, I didn't cut it up or cut and paste it. But if you look at coding, part of it is that you separate that which is relevant towards from that which is irrelevant. So a good example would be an assignment that I read last year, where the student looked at the influence of religion on people going through a difficult time. Now, of course, sometimes if you are in financial trouble and you inherit money, it helps the financial trouble, but it has nothing to do with your religion. So, do you see? Then you take that part out of the uh, coding. And then you have to identify your variables, and the variables must also be related to the coding. So you don't start coding blind. You do have, while you are writing your research proposal, you keep in mind, when I start coding this, what am I going to do? I just need to have a look if you have any questions up till now. No questions up till now. I don't trust that. Are you, all of you sitting in the garden? It's such a beautiful day in Cape Town. All of you sitting in the garden with a cup of tea. Now, the preparation to coding is a rigorous research process. And in the textbook I consulted, they said that when the students write about it, it's important that they use the word rigorous. But it's the process that's rigorous. It is not the outcome. Because in qualitative research, our findings are always within a context. It's the same for quantitative research as well. But the context, so your finding can never be so, you can't ever be so sure of your findings, but you must be able to defend your process properly. So what is rigorous research? It is credible. I'm going to speak about each of these ideas. And when you do your research proposal, use these words in order to present credible findings. This and that will be done. Transferability, dependability, and confirmability. Now look at credibility. It measures what is intended. So there has previously been said that there is a link between overachieving and anorexia. And although those things are linked, you have to make sure that your interview, your focus group, measures anorexia and not overachieving. Because some girls may also be obese as a result of something else and still overachieve. So, and that I'm back to my old advice. Don't even present a questionnaire to your supervisor without having consulted Lizzie, because she's very good, quantitative and qualitative, about the measures that the questionnaire is credible. And then credibility is also gained when you have a true reflection of the reality of the participants. And that is one is prolonged engagement. In the business world, they call certain, when you have an office, say for instance, in a small town like Barrydale, but the head office is in Cape Town. They often refer to people from head office as seagulls. They fly in, mess on the stoop, and fly back to where they've come from. You can imagine the people from Barrydale puts it in far more imaginative language. But if you are going to do research, it need to be a prolonged engagement. And that's why big organizations like NIDS, that has been doing research for years, their field workers will come from the area where the field work is done. It's people who understand the method and the context of movements in a community. Currently, I am very conscious of it. I used to have a neighbor, and his wife died about a year after I moved in here. He often left his garage door open because he was lonely and he wanted people to make contact. So we knew if the garage door was open, you can go in and take him something to eat or chat or something like that. He's moved out. I have new neighbors, and they lost a child not so long ago. They are in deep mourning. And even though we live about, say, 10 meters apart, there are weeks in which I don't see them. So it's in the same community, but mourning takes different aspects. And people who don't know their story, my neighbor's story, often think that they are stuck up. Do you see that this is so important, that if you do research on a community, that it's not a matter of flying in and flying out. The next one is a kind of humility. First of all, they call it, the term is member checks. So use that word in your research proposal. If somebody tells you, so you have an interview and it is transcribed, then you take the interview back to the person who spoke to you, who told you the story, and ask the person, this is how it has been transcribed. Is this the truth? Is this what you told me? So you check with the member. Then, if you interpreted, the person laughed, and you thought it might have been a sign of, I can't be bothered about it, it was funny. Check your interpretation. with the person you have interviewed. Because it might have been because the person was nervous. So credibility comes about when we have a true reflection of the reality of the participants. If we now go back to quantitative research, where you have an environmental impact study, it is the same. Can you see that for that kind of study to be credible, you can't go for one day, count 3 birds and say, now you can put up a wind farm. You need to be there for some time. And then you need to check your facts. Did you really see those 3 birds? Did you identify them correctly? So credibility is part of research, and in qualitative research, this is the form that it takes. Transferability is a big problem. Remember, I spoke about that they think there is a link between overachieving and anorexia, especially under girls doing ballet. But can I transfer that? So findings to be transferred to another context. Say, for instance, you've done research about ballet, girls doing ballet and anorexia. Can that be transferred to girls doing gymnastics? And that is why, and again, use the word thick description, because that is the word, that's the phrase that's used in research. So when you have, just like in quantitative research, where you have to describe exactly what equipment you are going to use. In a qualitative research, we need to describe in as much detail as possible the context of the research. Because then people using your research will be able to judge, can I transfer this knowledge, or should the findings be adapted? Does that open up the whole idea of new research? Then, is the research dependable? And that means if another researcher also follow in your footsteps, can they repeat the work? And therefore, you need to have an audit trail. So if another researcher use your interviews, your field notes, your questionnaires, and start the coding process all over again, will they be able to repeat it? Then, can it be confirmed? And there come in, and that's, I think, at the end, the reason why UNISA has started this postgraduate support, why they launched that, because to minimize researcher bias. There are many researchers who have little respect for Africa and its problems. I mean, the President of the United States referred to us as those shithole countries. And remember, I'm quoting Trump now. Research was often done without consent in Africa. And there is little respect for how what the nature of African problems is. So what we need is not people who think if it's out of Africa, it's good. They will make other mistakes. But we need to admit our own assumptions and what we believe in, so that we know. I go into a context. My personal experience would be somewhere in the Eastern Cape. They want to build a road to a sand mine. And the road would separate the people from where they have their cattle, and it will just be an ecological disaster. Now, somebody like me can't do the EIP there. I can't go and do the environmental impact study there because I've decided I don't like mining companies. That's a fact. So I'll never be able to do research that will come out in their favor. So we need to admit what we believe in so that we can minimize the researcher bias. And therefore, we have immersion in data. If we go back here, where I spoke about it, can you see you walk through this process over and over and over so that it's possible for you to grow with the data. I don't see his name here, but there was a student who wrote to me and said he's going to do qualitative research because quantitative sounds like a lot of calculations to do, and he doesn't like calculations. I think sometimes, I don't know, we can ask the chemistry guy that's here. Sometimes calculations can be solved with Excel. The problem comes in if you have the energy and the commitment to immerse yourself in the data. And it's your interactions every time that you listen to the data again, that you work through it again. I don't think I didn't take a screenshot, but they had a screenshot of people who wrote everything on post-it notes and how they moved the post-it notes around. And what I would advise you to do, because of course it's easier to do it with the with a computer program. And in some cases, I think on an honors level, because they want to teach you the method, it will be expected of you to work with the computer program. But what I find is when I write something and I start moving around and I start thinking, but this should have been there and that should have been there, that very movement gives me new insight. Because remember, the idea is not to think girls are going to get married. How are you going to work with the interaction between a girl in a school and her view of marriage later on? And to find those relationships, you need to be immersed in the data. Your data, if possible, should be in a variety of forms. Remember, photos, documents, journals, letters, emails, all of that is data in qualitative research. So, and it's especially interesting to see the difference between procedure. Those of you in the workplace, there's usually a disciplinary policy, and then you have the procedure that you have to follow during a disciplinary process. And it's interesting to compare those two. Then, when you think about it, there's a difference between sequence and relational. I want to use a very plain example there. In order for a plant to come up, I need to have planted a seed. But not all seeds. So there's a sequence. First the seed, then the seedling. But the relationship, the relational terminology there is different, because not all seeds become seedlings. So we can determine that events happen in a certain sequence, but we cannot assume that it will always happen. We need to look for the reasons why it happens in certain cases. Fine. Girls who do ballet, some of them develop anorexia. But who are they? What is the relation? Because not all girls who do ballet develop anorexia. And that is where you get your 80 and 90%. The people who can distinguish between what is the sequence and what is the relation. My conclusion: coding depends on a rigorous research process, which means that there is insight in the conceptual framework. And if you are at this stage still struggling with your conceptual framework, because remember, you've had now a year of working. Doesn't matter whether it's honors or masters. You must make an appointment with me, because concepts are words. And between the two of us, we must work out that you need to have the words for the ideas to follow. Because if you do not, we think in words, and if you do not have the words, you cannot do the thinking. So coding depends on the research process and the insight in the conceptual framework, and then it has a reference to the research objectives. So you go back to those, you usually have about 3 or 4 research objectives. And that concept must be reflected in your coding. Coding reveals categories, relationships, and trends. So after we've studied then girls doing ballet, girls doing gymnastics, we may find there's a link between the girls doing those and anorexia. But we can't say that girls doing physical exercise will develop anorexia because it's not true for other sport. So what is the categories? What is the relationship between a girl's physical exercise and her eating habits? And then what are the trends? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of my song for the day. Do you have, oh, here I see, Mr. Matala, I'll put my, oh, Lizzie says, if you want to contact, oh, okay. That one has been sorted. Okay. Are there any other questions or do you have any other remarks to make? Because I found the coding quite interesting because I had to think and read quite a lot. And I realized that coding is actually an important skill. You have to do it in research, but it's actually an important skill. If you have to read a contract, that's what you do. You look for the most important, you code it, you make it more accessible to yourself and understand it. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? You've been very quiet, and what made my life much easier was that Jock answered the questions for me. Filioen, I don't know, with the lady, Mr. or Mrs. Miss, when we talk about the researchers, do we, for rigor in the final report, do we say I, we, or the researcher? I have seen articles in which they use I. But Ms. Viljoen, it depends on your maturity as an academic writer. Personally, I usually recommend rather use the passive voice as part of, you can have it like that, as part of the rigorous research process. The questionnaires will be presented to a statistician beforehand. And then you skip the I and the we totally. Any other questions? At this stage, you can put up your hand and I'll give you permission to unmute. Any of you ready to present at the discussion forum? The next discussion forum will be the second Thursday in September. I'm not sure of the date, but I looked at it and my evening is free. We Here's one about local government and service deliveries. It's a guest. Um, are you doing a master's or an honors? I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Is she still? I can't see whether that's still there. And Mr. Malala, are you a master's or an honors student? Masters? Don't you, the master student, or Mrs. Sun, don't you want to contact me? Because, Alona, I'll come to your question now. Because that is such a current project. It will be interesting, and then students can actually tell their own experience of service delivery and so on. So we can have quite a, 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 a lively discussion. Will you contact me, please, so that we can see if we can't the student, sorry, I can't, you can see I'm clicking on your name now. If you contact me, then we can work on you presenting next time. Mr. Malali, I'd like you to contact me as well, because and maybe then you can be one of the first honors students to present. But the idea is sometimes it's much easier to illustrate certain steps if we have quantitative research. I'll speak to Lizzie and maybe we can make it a co-presentation. Lorna asked, can you explain thick descriptions? Lorna, let's go back to that exercise that I've had with a student who applied the grounded theory to the experience that people, religious people, have of problems through their lifetime. In that case, she had to explain very carefully the social class the people belong to, their marital status. She had to describe how she got to know them, and then the nature of the religion that they belong to. She even explained something about their physical context, what kind of homes, houses they had, more or less in what income group, because there's a difference between social, it's linked, but there's also a difference between social class and income. She even had to explain that. She went into detail about the quality of their relationship with their husbands. It was 3 women, and the relationship with their children. So that is a thick description. Because I looked at it, because I'm more or less the same. Well, I'm about 10 to 15 years younger than the women described. And I looked at it and I had this quite cynical idea. It's, you are very comfortably off. No wonder you are very positive about certain experiences. So in a thick description, you don't it's a fine line. I think Jacques must come in here if he knows more about it. But it's a fine line. People must not be able to identify the group that you've spoken to, but you need to give so much information that somebody who wants to apply that research must know if they can transfer the information. Any other questions? Would that background info be gathered as part of an interview? It might be, Lorna, but the thing is, remember, we work with samples and populations. So first, you have to define your population, and then there is interaction between defining your sample, who are you going to choose for your interview, and why you're going to choose it. So I think at this, you are still at the beginning of your studies. At your stage, you will have to get a very fine idea about the population and what your sample will be. And then once you've done your research, you might add more information to look at the transferability of your research. Christian, what exactly is your field of expertise? Biochemistry, masters. I see such interesting, the public administration, yes. I see such interesting topics here that I wish I could accommodate all of you in the discussion forums. So, but what we can do, because I have enough hours, I'm a contract worker, I have enough hours to be here. If you get a group together, we can have more discussion forums than we usually have. I'm sure Jacques will give permission for that, because the more you present your research, the better it will be. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the weather is absolutely beautiful. All of you should go out and do something, because the Boland is as beautiful as we get it this time of the year. Then I'll see you next Saturday, where we're going to speak about the referencing. I'm going to see if I can get help from the library, because they are very good with the referencing and they understand that. And then I'm going to touch on the plagiarism, because I feel very sorry for some of you where it's unintended plagiarism, but you are going to be penalized, or you are penalized, or were penalized all the same. So good luck with all your work, and see you next Saturday. The same link should work for the next meeting as well. Okay, thank you.